Oculus by Eerily. Chapter 1. Shadowman. "Tweak, darling," his mother said solemnly. "We need to have a little talk if that's okay." Rain pounded against the glass. It set odd patterns across the living room walls and Tweak's unflinching face. He sat on the seat of the bay window and peered out at the street. He didn't seem to hear her. He just sat and stared out that window. Sat and waited. She came towards him. Her hand smoothed out her nightgown as she took a seat on the same cushion. "It's about your little friend." The gloomy boy perked with interest. Did they find him?" Tweak asked without hesitation. "Did they find where Craig is?" Her lips pursed together, and then she too directed her gaze to the storm outside. "It's been a week now, honey. They still haven't found anything. I'm so sorry, but I'm not sure they will." "What do you mean? Of course they will," Tweak declared. "They have to." She forced a smile on her face and then ran her fingers through her short brown bob. Yes, of course. But don't you think Craig would be sad if he saw you sitting here alone all the time?" Thunder rolled in the distance and lightning cracked across the sky. In that moment, the dark street flashed white. He saw someone. It was only a faint silhouette in the mist of the wind and rain, but it was there, crawling. He swallowed hard and wiped his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "Well, how about this? Let's go to bed and leave the window alone for tonight. Then I'll make you a big breakfast in the morning. How does that sound?" Tweak kept his eyes on the road where he'd seen the silhouette, but he didn't see it again. "Okay," he agreed. She stood, and then he reluctantly stood with her. He didn't want to go to his room. David, the man in the attic, still liked to come down at night. It had been a year since he tormented Craig and Tweak during their sleepover, but he never stopped trying to talk to Tweak. He was afraid he might find himself listening. His sock-covered feet scuffed against the tan carpet as his mother led him up the stairs and into that very room. She didn't seem to feel the shift in air like he did. No one seemed to, though. Without any fuss, he slipped underneath his comforter. One of his pillows still smelt like Craig. His bottom lip quivered when he caught a faint whiff of it. He could remember his friend's face so vividly. Craig's voice almost seemed to whisper through the sheets as if he was drifting to sleep. The room sometimes still felt like it did when he was there, but he wasn't. He didn't understand why he was gone. Tweak wanted him back. Tears pooled in the small boy's blue eyes. He tried not to let them spill over while his mom was with them. He was 12 after all. He wasn't a baby anymore. Though he tried hard, his pillow became wet. Craig. He couldn't stop the sorrowful chokes and whines bubbling up from his throat. He couldn't survive without his best friend. His body went limp when his mother scooted closer and pulled him into her arms. For an empty few moments, she listened to her only child cry. What else could she have done? There wasn't a lie she could say that would calm her son's fear. There wasn't a promise she could make that would change anything. Craig was gone for some time now, and the longer he was away, the less likely it was he'd ever come back. Still, she held Tweak. She squeezed him in her arms and pressed a lingering kiss to his hair. Not every mother was lucky enough to kiss her son good night. She would never take it for granted again. "Would you feel better if I slept here tonight?" she offered under his cries. Much to her relief, Tweak nodded. The two settled into the warmth of the small bed. It brought little comfort for either of them, though it made Tweak feel better knowing he wasn't alone. As the night crept onward, the little boy did not sleep. His mother's chest rose and fell in relaxed rhythm. He listened close to her breasts. Somehow, it helped him feel safe, though it didn't ease his dreadful worry. His best friend was out there somewhere. Was he alone? Was he cold or hungry? Those thoughts devoured his mind. He didn't think of anything else until an odd noise pierced through the quiet. Tap, tap. Tweak's head rose from his pillow. Tap, tap. It sounded like knuckles knocking against glass from somewhere across the room. "Craig?" he whispered hopefully. He tried not to disturb his mom as he crawled out of the bed, but the moment his feet touched the floor, he ran to the window. Tap, tap. He drew his curtains and looked on the roof. There wasn't anyone on the other side. There was only a blanket of blackness that fell over his backyard. Still, he opened the window and stuck his head into the rainy breeze. A gust of wind blew into his room, strong enough to rustle his curtains. It felt ice cold, just like it did when David tried to show him things. Unnerved, he slammed the window closed and pulled the curtains together. Tap, 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 tap. It was louder and disturbingly persistent. Something was out there. It wanted inside. The 12-year-old darted back to his bed and crawled in close to his mother's side. He practically buried himself under her back. She stirred and sucked in a heavy breath, but otherwise didn't wake. There was rustling from across his bedroom. Again, the shaken boy turned his head to the window. The persistent tapping turned into scratching. It was not the limb of an unruly tree causing a racket like most would assume. It was solid bone. Hard, bloody tips scraped against the glass as the monstrosity they belonged to tried to pry open the window. "Mom?" Tweak croaked in apprehension. In the dark, it was hard to see. Oftentimes, he noticed figures and shadows, faces and bodies. He always told himself it was just his imagination. They were all just in his head, David being the exception. This, though, it was more than the flash of a face or a quiet murmur. It was opening his window, which, to his horror, he left unlocked. He grabbed his stuffed turtle off his nightstand and squeezed it tight. From his toy's back, the room became illuminated by faded green shapes. The breeze again seeped into his room. Curtains fluttered and swayed, and a twisted figure made its way inside. His breath caught in his throat when he watched the dark mass of distorted limbs tumble on the floor, leaving dark streaks of sludge dripping down his wall. It hissed and choked as it convulsed. Tweak slammed his eyes closed as he heard it dig its bony fingers into the carpet. The only thing that horrified him more was its grotesque gurgling, slowly inching closer. It was dragging itself towards his bed. "It's all in my head," he thought through brimming tears. "It's a bad dream. A bad dream." His bed frame groaned beneath him and his mother, and a faint grumbling seeped out through his mattress. It was less like random noise and more like a weeping child. Less like a monster and more like Craig. Tweak rolled out of bed. A disgusting trail of bodily fluids and wet earth slathered across his carpet. He stuck his nose up at the rancid smell. Shivers worked their way up his spine. The dark streaks did indeed disappear onto the edge of his bed. After much deliberation, he lifted the blankets to peer underneath. He wasn't nearly as brave as his actions made him seem. If he hadn't been convinced he'd heard Craig's voice, he'd be sobbing under his blankets instead. "Craig?" Tweak whispered. "Is that you?" He pressed the back of his stuffed turtle again, which lit the dark space with tiny green moons and stars. He had been right. Bloody fingertips stripped of their flesh dug into the base of his box spring. A small form slathered in mud and streaks of dark blood latched to the underbelly of his bed, hanging there. He could see its multiple bruised, bare limbs twisted awkwardly around its body as it heaved. The horrid creature was gasping desperately for breath. "What happened to you?" His turtle's green light cast a colorful glow on the bloody mess as it began to move towards him. All he heard was the grinding and popping of bones as a small face peeked out from behind its rotting arm. Or at least, what was left of a face. Tweak slapped his hand over his mouth to hide a scream at the terrible sight. By instinct, he jolted away from the bed and tumbled back to the floor. Oh God. Oh Jesus fucking Christ. Once he gathered his bearings, he quickly crawled back to the bed and yanked the skirt back up. His turtle was still lighting the small space, but, to his alarm, there was nothing there but a few boxes and an old pair of socks. No gory monster, and no bloody mess on the carpet. Craig? Where'd you go?" Tweak gasped with tears in his eyes. The only evidence that his friend had been there at all was the faint sound of heavy breathing that lingered around his bed. He searched all night to try to find the source of it. After all, Craig was there somewhere, and he was hurting. Craig was hurting. 5 years. 5 years, 2 months, and 7 days ago. If he thought hard enough, perhaps he could even count down to the very second it happened. All those years ago, those months and days ago, it occurred. His mother asked him a question that triggered the misery and desperation his life became. "Have you seen Craig?" He dug his fingers into his sandwich. It was butter and jelly. Not peanut butter, but real butter. The yellow kind that a normal person would use for things like toast. Tweak liked it better. He looked up at his lunch table. It was empty aside from him and the shuddering creature hiding between his legs. The other kids abandoned him a long time ago. At first, they taunted and bullied him. He was a prime target after all. Spewing out his make-believe of ghosts gave them plenty to work with. He was practically begging to be shoved in a locker. However, their mindless torture stopped in middle school, when their fear began. They believed he wasn't any normal person. He was something so frightening they wouldn't dare to say a word to him. They wouldn't risk bumping into him in the hallway, sitting with him at lunch, or even throwing him a pity greeting. No one would risk being his friend, let alone his bully. He was cursed, they said. Cursed. Tweak believed so, too. Perhaps he could try to conjure up an argument for his normality, but a point would be hard to make. The little hands gripping the backs of his legs were enough in themselves to prove he wasn't normal. As if in agreement, a low and guttural noise gurgled up from between his knees. If Tweak had to put an image to it, he thought it sounded like someone choking on blood. "Thanks for that. If you were just going to make fun of me all day, you should have stayed home," Tweak reasoned, before taking a bite out of his sandwich. More gurgling followed. It wasn't a pattern of speech, it was just grotesque sounds. Sounds Tweak had grown used to. He looked down in his lap to try to catch sight of the creature. However, there wasn't anything to see. There were only the tips of hard bones scraping against his pant legs. He continued to attend to his growling stomach and not think about it. He was sinking his teeth into bread and jelly when he happened to glance up in the wrong direction. 2 familiar faces came out of the lunch line. They walked close beside one another with their trays in hand. One was sporting a rather stylish purple coat. The other had a red jersey tied around his waist, though he belonged to no team. They were both smiling and happy. Token and Clyde. At one time, he would be smiling with delight as he watched those same people approach his table and plop down beside him. Now, he only looked down at his lunch bag so he wouldn't have to see them navigate the tables to avoid coming near his. It had been some time since he spoke to either of them. They couldn't understand what he was going through, and he couldn't understand why they wouldn't help. They left him abandoned like everyone else. The large room was buzzing with conversation. Groups of friends, large and small alike, enjoyed one another's company. They gossiped and exchanged secrets. They listened to one another and told jokes. Every table had company and laughter, all except for his. "Let's go," he muttered under his breath. He stood abruptly from his lonely seat. The mangled figure that huddled between his knees was gone, but not far. Craig was never far. No one seemed to notice as he carefully navigated around their tables. No one noticed when he pushed past the wide double doors to the cafeteria and slipped into the hall. No one noticed him. No one at all. He moved quickly through the guts of the building. The halls were barren and empty. The only sounds he heard were the squeaking of his sneakers and a pair of barefoot feet mimicking his footsteps. The lights flickered and cracked as he walked beneath them. "Stop messing with me, would you?" he demanded. Those same footsteps continued from behind. Tweak didn't stop to look back, and he paid no mind to the quiet murmur of mischievous giggles that echoed through the hall. Giggles that were not Craig's, though they came from him. Soon, Tweak found himself at a small emergency door that led to the field behind the school. When he stopped and took a hold of the handle, the disembodied sound of slapping feet came to a halt behind him. "Why are you so talkative today?" Tweak asked before finally turning around and gazing back into the empty hall. There was nothing. Huffing in exasperation, Tweak shoved open the exit and snuck outside. He immediately felt a weight lift off of his chest the moment his sneakers landed on cement. Out there by the loading docks, he was safe from everyone else. Safe, but cold. He zipped his green hoodie up to his chin and clutched his paper lunch bag in his hand. After a few moments of walking along the brick wall of the school, he spotted who he'd been searching for. A group of 4 sat in a row against the brick wall. They huddled under the awning that sheltered another back door. He could faintly hear their music playing and see the smoke wafting from the ends of their cigarettes. They all wore dark clothes, and their hair was dyed to match. They reminded him much of crows huddled together on a telephone line. He wrapped his arms around himself as he approached, then offered a friendly wave hello. "Ah, if it isn't Spooks, Michael," the tallest of the 4 said. He tightened his black jacket around his torso before he took another long drag. Tweak nodded slowly before joining the crows in their line. He sat down where the awning cut away, which kept a good bit of distance between them and him. Most definitely, he was an owlier. A canary like himself didn't fit into their gothic flock, let alone their circle of friends. However, unlike the rest of the school, they weren't afraid of him. In fact, they embraced his weirdness with an odd interest no one else bothered to have. "How's your demon friend today?" Michael asked between puffs of a cigarette. Demon? Craig's not a demon," Tweak argued passionately. "He's creepy, but he's friendly." "Okay then," Michael said. "How's Casper?" Tweak sighed as he again dug through his lunch bag for his half-eaten sandwich. He never knew how to respond when they asked him questions like that. Usually, he'd just keep Craig and all the other ghouls to himself. Then again, he rarely talked to the living at all. He could never tell if they were making fun of him. Conversations with the Goths were no exception. "Needy," he replied with a cracking voice. He knew where the puffing warmth on his neck was coming from, and it wasn't the breeze. He counted each of Craig's breaths as he chewed on his sandwich. "It's been a few days since you came to visit us," another very female voice noted aloud. Tweak looked past Michael to find who'd spoken. Henrietta. She was a carbon copy of the others when it came to her style. She wore a black halter top decorated in lace, along with an unzipped black hoodie, a black pair of jeans. Black. Tweak couldn't understand what was so great about such a listless color. "Oh yeah, we've been eating in the lunchroom," he admits. "Why?" Michael butts in. "The place is crawling with those petty conformists." Tweak stopped to think for a moment. Why? "To try to feel normal, I guess," Tweak admitted quietly. "I'm sick of everyone being scared of me." He pulled on the strings hanging from the holes in his pants. He still counted each breath Craig puffed on the back of his neck. 117, 118, 119. "There isn't anything normal about you, Spooks," Henrietta replied. She leaned forward to get a better look at the boy counting to himself. "Stop trying to blend in with all those maggots infesting this place. It's bad for your health." "Yeah," Michael agreed as smoke rolled out of his nostrils. "Who gives 2 shits if the conformists don't like you anyways? As if their thoughts aren't tainted by this disgusting society." Pete and Ferkel remained quiet, though they nodded their heads in silent agreement. For the first time in a long time, Twig felt touched. Twig spent the rest of the hour in silence. He ate while listening to their chatter and weird music, and his jaw synced his chews with the quiet rhythm of Craig's labored breathing, puffing in his ear. Meanwhile, back in the depths of the school building, Kyle sat at his own lunch table. It really wasn't much different from any other day of that year. He and Kenny McCormick sat side by side across from Butters Stotch and Eric Cartman. Like Tweak, few words left his mouth those days. His communication whittled down to small smiles and few-word sentences. He was always too tired to engage himself in conversations with his friends or bicker with that lard-ass Cartman. He swirled his fork in spaghetti while listening to the buzz between Cartman and Kenny. Butters was also too absorbed in reading a copy of that day's newspaper to pay much attention. You know, I never liked that movie much. The acting was shitty, and the monster was cheesy as hell, Eric said with his nose upturned. The monster wasn't scary, no. But who cares if the acting was good? The chick was hot as hell, Kenny said with a small smirk. I mean, damn, you saw that sex scene, right? Wow, you guys, Butters exclaimed, interrupting a rare moment in which Eric and Kenny weren't trying to tear one another's throats out. There's a story about the Shadowman in the papers again. Kenny and Eric both stopped dead conversation. The heavier of the two rolled his eyes in disinterest. They weren't surprised by what Butters told them. Everyone at the table had already heard the story before. In fact, everyone in South Park had. It was happening for years, after all, since they were still kids even. Every article was the same retelling of the same phenomena they'd known all their lives. Oh, come on, Butters. Shadowman isn't real. He's just some dumb story our parents told us so we'd shit ourselves so bad we wouldn't sneak out at night, Cartman said before taking a bite of his pizza. Oh yeah? Then how do you explain all the holes? Butters argued. They're huge, and they've been showing up forever. God damn it, Butters. Animals. Animals dig up the ground all the frickin' time. You expect everybody to believe they're made by some psycho ghost? Kyle huffed to himself as he soaked up the banter. Shadowman. They said he was the ghost of a man who drowned in Stark's Pond. A bitter, angry man who found someone in bed with his wife when he came home an hour early. A savage, psychotic man who confronted her about what he'd seen with the jagged blade of a hunting knife. After chopping her into pieces, he stuffed heavy, bloody bags into the back of his truck. He drove to Stark's Pond to do what all psychotic murderers do: dispose of bodies. However, his plot failed when said truck veered off of the road and plummeted into the murky waters. His evidence was indeed disposed of, along with himself, as they sunk to the muddy bottom. The story wasn't over. Every night since, he came out of the lake to finish what he started. The black, 8-foot-tall phantom littered the waterline and woods alike, with deep holes to hide the pieces of his dismembered wife. And, as the story goes, if you caught him in the act, he'd dispose of you too. They all had seen hundreds of his holes over the years. Everyone who went to Stark's did. They even found one big enough for Kenny to lay in, despite the mud and worms. However, not one of them ever caught a glimpse of the infamous Shadowman. Not even Kyle. He definitely sensed his presence there. He'd even seen childlike apparitions, but a Shadowman wasn't among them. Well, you know what? Butters said confidently as he held the newspaper out before him. Just listen to this, since you don't believe me. He held the paper up to his face and read aloud the headline, Shadowman, caught on camera. Being the rebel he was, Butters turned the large page and skipped ahead to the very last paragraph. Whoa, he exclaimed before clearing his throat and reading the paper for everyone to hear. Here for the first time, a local fisherman, Ricky Malkinson, has caught photographic evidence of Stark's Shadowman. He captured this ghostly image at around 11 p.m. while boating with his son. Oh, hamburgers, Would you look at that? The whole table shifted close to get a look at the ghost that's haunted their imaginations since childhood. Even Kyle stood up to follow Kenny around the table and eyeball the evidence. It was definitely the shore of Starks. They recognized the woods well. The image was clear. Mostly. There was just one exception. Kyle's eyes widened when they took their fill of a black mass in the trees. That in itself wouldn't have been very impressive to him. What was impressive was the number of orbs. They were dim, circular lights that seemed to be retreating through the trees along with the dark specter. Everyone else continued the conversation as Kyle stared intensely at the small square on the paper. Geez, I guess people are offering money for information and pictures and stuff, Butters muttered more to himself than his friends. Of course they are, Kenny replied as he made his way back to his seat. Someone's been ripping up the ground around Starks forever. The park rangers are probably sick of having to fill all those holes in. Shit, I wonder how much they'd pay for pictures like that, Cartman said while stroking his chin. I don't like that look on your face, Eric, Butters said while folding up the paper. Really though, just think about it. They're offering money for a picture, right? Now think about how much we made if we got video. No, if we caught it. Cartman was nearly foaming at the mouth with possibilities. Kenny swallowed hard and played with his lunch. Pizza, which Kyle purchased on his behalf. Honestly, a ghost hunt in the woods is just the kind of thing he found fun in. Something's more important than having fun. Sounds great and all, Kenny interrupted before leaning back in his chair. But how in the hell are you expecting to find that thing, let alone catch it? If it turns out Shadowman is real, the last thing you'd want is to catch him trying to hide body parts. Yeah, and you don't even believe in him, Butters added with a twisted expression. Oh, please. If he is real, he's just some guy in a robe trying to scare people. If he's not, we'll throw a robe on Butters and film him stumbling around in the woods. Hey, Butters protested. I'm not even tall enough. So, Kenny scoffed, our options are either playing Scooby-Doo in the woods at night or staging a hoax. No thanks. Oh, come on. Usually you'd be itching for a little adventure, especially if it meant we'd make money. Don't tell me playing babysitter for the Jew turned you soft. He's not my babysitter. I don't need anyone to take care of me, Kyle snapped before Kenny could get a word in. He crossed his arms and huffed. It gave the opposite effect of what he was pinning for. Prove it, Cartman challenged, eyes narrowing and grin widening. It was hard to get under Kyle's skin those days. Eric was not about to pass up an opportunity to push his buttons. Fine, Kyle hissed. I'll come on your pissy little adventure. Kenny furrowed his brows in worry. The last thing you need is to get caught up in Cartman's bullshit right now. I can make decisions for myself, Kyle mumbled under his breath. He took a big bite of his lunch, as if that would exempt him from having to say any more. Hey, you heard the man, Cumstain. Ginger wants an adventure? Who am I to deny him of that? Eric butt in, obviously giddier than neither Butters nor Kenny felt comfortable with. There was one undeniable truth about their group. If Cartman was excitedly scheming, something was going to go wrong. Great then, Cartman uttered before ripping open his milk carton. Meet me and Butters there tonight, 9 p.m. sharp. This time tomorrow, we'll be famous. Tonight? Dude, it's going to be pouring down rain, Kenny objected. You know we aren't the only ones who thought of this. The promise of money is all over the papers. If we go into the rain, fewer people should show. He was good at plotting. Kyle had to give him that much. Still, even he couldn't deny the sinking feeling in his stomach.